Even Jyakuo had heard about it. The so-called small Lin, the one who disappeared, was that you? That means you've been working on this for a while. But why? After a moment, Takubatsu said, Master Jyakuan asked me to. He said that if Big Lin seemed to be hiding any papers from long ago, to let him know. He told me to burn anything I found. That was why he periodically called me here. Now it all made sense. I see, Jyakuo said. Jyakuan had, as ever, had his son's interests at heart. He'd given Jyakuo hell for what he'd done to the Yi clan those 17 years ago, but even then he hadn't disinherited him. Jyakuo worked on Jyakuan's behalf, so that the people would venerate him, so that charity could be given to the weak, so that everyone would see him as a hero upon whom they could rely. Jyakuo knew his father would forgive what he did. For Jyakuo, who would take over from his father, was the perfect politician, unblemished, always thinking of what would help the Western capital thrive. That was how he knew that what he was doing now was right. If you really care about the Western capital, please, stop this nonsense about attacking other countries, Takubatsu said. If you woe, he took a knife from the folds of his robe. Jyakuo didn't take a step back, however he couldn't spend any more time on this matter. He forced his coursing blood to cool and let out a great sigh. Very well, he said, I won't do anything. Do you mean that? Yes, but only let me go to this ceremony. If I don't appear, the mood will sour. I don't want to damage the imperial younger brother's reputation. Yes, very well. But I'm going to keep this family register close. I fully intend to raise the matter with Master Jyakuan. With that, Takubatsu put the knife on the table and picked up the register instead. Jyakuo trusted that he wouldn't tell anyone what he knew. I want you to know one thing, Takubatsu. For the Western capital, for I say province, there is nothing I won't do. I know that. You always told me how much you wanted to be a great man like Master Jyakuan. Takubatsu actually smiled. Exactly. To you he is a noble father, and I too see him as a father I can respect more than anyone else. Jyakuo didn't speak, but at that, a thread snapped within him. He intended to remain calm at this moment no matter what happened. But it was bad enough for Takubatsu to call Jyakuo his younger brother. Now he called Jyakuan his father. Jyakuo had to be Jyakuan's eldest son. He had to be his pride, the leader of the Western capital. HRNGH, Takubatsu exclaimed. Before Jyakuo knew what had happened, he realized there was a knife in his right hand and a sheath in his left. Something slick ran along his palm. WHY, Takubatsu's eyes were wide and bloody foam dribbled from the corner of his mouth. His blood poured down the table and onto the floor. The family register he'd been holding dropped from his hands and into the red pool. Because you're in my way. With the knife still lodged in Takubatsu, Jyakuo's mind turned to the events of the past. He had wished to be like his father, and he had longed for his father to validate him. Jyakuan loomed so large in his mind. Jyakuo had grown large too, but it wasn't the same. At first he hadn't much minded. Jyakuan and Sabo had handled business together, and the family had been surrounded by servants. Jyakuan was a brilliant businessman, and Sabo was every bit as sharp as he was. She was a hugely capable woman, and she would find out what he needed, then act to get it. Jyakuo had wanted for nothing in his upbringing. However, when he was 5 years old, another woman and her daughter came to live with them. Jyakuan fawned over the new child, a little sister to Jyakuo, who was still just 2 years old. Sabo was nearly as smitten as her husband. The new woman was also kind to Jyakuo. 2 years after that, a third woman arrived, bringing a little brother. Then there was a fourth and a fifth. The family got bigger and bigger. Each time it did, Jyakuo worried. To him, it felt like a jar full of honey being gradually diluted with water. Jyakuan always picked intelligent women. One was a master of horsemanship, another skilled in arithmetic. Each of them passed on their particular talents to their offspring. The women supported Jyakuo's father, and their children in turn helped them. Through the bonds of family, the newly arrived Yu household became great in the Western capital. At the same time, Jyakuo felt the bond joining him to Jyakuan weakening, yet it proved otherwise. Jyakuan chose Jyakuo as his successor. Sabo was still Jyakuan's official wife. The other women were only consorts. Surely only Jyakuo could rule the Western capital as Jyakuan had, not his younger brothers or sisters. Even after he discovered that he was not Jyakuan's real son, Jyakuo maintained his equanimity. So what if they weren't connected by blood? Jyakuan valued Jyakuo most of all. He could not have cared more for him if he'd been his own flesh and blood. So it was that Jyakuo was able to be kind and gentle to his younger siblings. He was tolerant of them. Jyakuo alone was like a cuckoo's chick, a different creature from his brothers and sisters. But so long as his father treated him as his eldest son, Gyuku-o meant to play the part of the elder brother to the hilt. The very last mother and child that Gyukyun welcomed into his house, however, Gyuku-o could not tolerate. They had red hair and pale green eyes, just like the master who had tormented Sabo when she was a slave. Bit by bit the curses overflowed, the way ink might stain a piece of parchment. The patter of blood dripping to the floor brought Gyuku-o back to reality. Okuo Takubatsu looked at him with bloodshot eyes and said something, his voice a whisper, but Gyuku-o couldn't hear it. Gyuku-o flipped the knife around in his hand and gutted Takubatsu. Unable to speak anymore, he only glared at Gyuku-o with baleful eyes. One final mercy for a milk brother, Gyuku-o said, and then he pulled the knife out before driving it past Takubatsu's ribs and into his heart. Takubatsu groaned, twitched and died. The knife had belonged to Takubatsu. He had tried to attack Gyuku-o, only to meet his end by his own weapon. Yes, that would do for a scenario. Gyuku-o picked up the family register, wrapped it in a cloth and placed it in a drawer. He was right, someone had heard the shouting. There was a rush of footsteps that stopped outside the door, followed by a knock. Master Gyuku-o, is everything all right? A voice asked. Come in, he said. Master Gyuku-o. It wasn't his aide who entered, but Rikyusen. He'd been at the conference with them. He must have come to check on Gyuku-o when he was running late. What in the world happened here? Rikyusen asked, maintaining an air of calm despite his obvious shock. This was the man that Gyuku-o's father had sent him from the royal capital to be his adjutant. He knew enough not to immediately make a scene. You're telling me you can't guess? Gyuku-o asked. This man, he's the one who sought an audience with you a few minutes ago, isn't he? Rikyusen must have seen Takubatsu when he spoke to the aide. That's right. He was my milk brother, in fact, so I indulged him. He came to beg for money, but when he saw he couldn't wheedle anything out of me, he became enraged. Gyuku-o showed him Takubatsu's knife. You did this, sir? Yes. What do you think, that someone like him could overpower me? Gyuku-o's face was still twitching. Takubatsu had brought this upon himself. He talked as if he, not Gyuku-o, were Gyukyun's eldest son. Gyuku-o placed the knife on the table. He would have to change quickly and get some perfume to cover the smell of blood. Not at all, Master Gyuku-o. Your strength he could not best. Rikyusen knelt down and looked at Takubatsu's body. Inspecting the wounds, it seemed like I didn't want to do it, but he left me no choice. I wanted to settle things amicably. I have a ceremony to attend, but he tried to stand in my way. Good riddance to him. Rikyusen's gaze was empty as it drifted from Takubatsu to Gyuku-o and back. Yes, of course. Then, for a second, Gyuku-o lost sight of Rikyusen. He turned. Where had he gone? To find the other man right next to him. Here's what I'll tell everyone, Rikyusen said. His expression was cold, except for a glint of flame deep in his eyes. What was this? Master Gyuku-o was attacked by a traitor. Suddenly Gyuku-o felt very warm. He met his end, they said. What did that mean? Gyuku-o was still trying to understand when he collapsed. He found himself face to face with Takubatsu. Blood was all over the floor and he could hear it flowing. Rikyusen said, I arrived too late to save him, but I was able to stop the traitor. What did that mean? What was he talking about? Gyuku-o didn't understand. He opened his mouth to say something, but he couldn't speak. Bloody foam appeared at the corner of his mouth. He gasped, but still no voice came out, only a groan like the warbling of a bird. Rikyusen said, don't make that face. Don't pretend you don't know why. You'll be able to be the star. Rikyusen's face was expressionless, but tears were in his eyes. The hero of a tragedy, he said. The tears ran down his cheeks and fell to the floor. He couldn't do anything, not like this. He could not do anything for the Western capital. He could not rule the city as his father's son. He could not go to Shea and rescue the slaves as his father had done. He had planned to punish the man who had put his mother through hell. Gyuku-o was Gyukyun's eldest son. He would not let anyone usurp his place. All he had to do was erase every last shred of evidence that Gyukyun wasn't his father. He would do anything to achieve that. Even if it meant bringing down the Yi clan, which had sullied its hands with wrongdoing for the benefit of the Western capital. One day, when it was all gone, he was going to rule secure in Gyukyun's place. The clatter of a carriage, the neighing of the horses, the creak of the wheels, the shouting of the driver filled the air. The sounds of the marketplace rose around him, the shouts of the merchants, the burble of the crowd, the laughter of children. The air was dry and the earth exhausted. Though the land had scant blessings, the people here lived bravely and well. He was going to make them more prosperous, richer, but not anymore. It was then that Gyukuo realized something strange. Something was wrong. Why, when he was meant to inherit the leadership of the Western capital in Gyukuan's place? Why, when it fell to him to help the city grow? Why, with all that being true, would he put the Western capital in danger? He felt the threads that had bound him for so many years unraveling, one by one. Threads that had held him for decades snapped and gave way, and he was free. Gyukuo's life scattered like a string of jade beads. The man who had cut it was right there before his eyes, on his face a mixture of hatred and pity. Who are you? That was the last thought Gyukuo had. He would think no more, do no more. He would not make the Western capital flourish as his father had. He had sought to be a hero, but his life ended in utter anticlimax. Chapter 20, The Weeping Wind Part 2. His mother had often said to him, "When you grow up, you'll become the wind." When he came of age at 15, he would go out into the world. But until then, she told him, he must study all that the world had to offer. 2 more years of learning lay ahead of him. Become the wind, she told him, and blow so that the air of the western reaches might stay clear. It was a memory from the time before Rikusen was called Rikusen. The women protected the town while the men roamed across the plains. This was what he had been taught. He was sad to know he would have to leave home someday, but if he could become the wind, if he could be of help to his mother and his older sister, then he was glad of that. He enjoyed his afternoon walks, trying to decide how he could best use the pocket change they gave him. How could he get something good for it and not waste it? What should he spend it on that would be satisfying? That was its own kind of study. Many of his male relatives who went out on their own became merchants, and Rikusen expected that was the path he too would choose. He went from shop to shop, comparing flavors and prices and quantities, until he found the best dried fruit or goat's milk and bought it. Then he would go to the shogi hall. It was full of adults with time to kill, jawing with each other, and there was much information to be had there. Rikusen might be able to hear even more talk at the tavern, but he wasn't yet of age and they wouldn't let him in. There were plenty of drunks at the shogi hall too, but once in a while you could run into a true master. "Oh, hey there, kiddo, back again?" asked an old man sitting at a shogi board. He was a former secretary at the administrative building. He was mostly retired now, but he was collecting materials for some sort of new history he was compiling. He was the best shogi player in the Western capital. Everyone called him Big Lin. Aha! Rikusen seated himself beside Big Lin and studied the board. Sticking close to him would keep the nastier drunks away. Then Rikusen tilted his head. Big Lin was losing this game. You didn't see that often. Rikusen looked at his opponent. He saw a man still young but ragged and filthy. His face had a fine stubble, his clothes were grimy, and his hair was barely tied back. His outfit was nice enough, but it seemed his circumstances weren't. He looked feeble and didn't have a tan. He didn't seem to be a resident of the Western capital. But his eyes glinted like those of a fox. "I see you have a little pawn with you," the man said. It was a shogi piece. He wore a monocle over one of his fox-like eyes, an imported piece. But on this guy everything looked crude instead of fancy. What did he mean by that? He seemed to be talking about Rikusen. He bristled at the expression, his hands balling into fists. "Who are you calling a pawn?" he demanded. "Don't get upset, kid. Lacan's just that kind of creature," Big Lin said calmly. "But he called me a pawn. What's wrong with that?" "Most people, he just calls them ghost stones." Ghost stones. Rikusen wasn't sure what the difference was between a ghost stone and a pawn. He looked at the board as he pondered the question. This Lacan might look suspicious and might mock everyone he met, but he backed it up by being a tremendous shogi player. This was the first time Rikusen had ever seen Big Lin losing a game. Even if Big Lin wasn't quite the player he had been in his youth at the peak of his powers, people still called him the shogi sage. It almost didn't seem possible that he could lose, but this visitor seemed to be holding him to 50-50 in their games. Curious, Rikusen came back the next day and the day after that. Lacan was always there. Did he even have a job? When he wasn't at the shogi hall, Rikusen found out he was at the go hall. All he did was play games. One day Big Lin wasn't there. Lacan was playing with some other people, but he looked awfully bored by it. "It's him again," someone said. The ye boy, no one would have dared to say such a thing in the presence of Big Lin, but they felt no need to restrain themselves when Rikusen was alone. Ye boy, a child of the Yi clan, that was what they were calling him. The Yi clan ruled the Western capital, but many resented their unique system of inheritance and were ready to speak ill of them. Generation to generation, the Yi clan was ruled by women. Any boys who were born left their homes when they came of age. You women did not have husbands and didn't know who the fathers of their children were. Some sneered, saying they reproduced like animals. Rikusen knew such contempt was to be expected. Many members of the nomadic tribes passed through the western capital, and those tribes always had a strong patriarchal bent. They even denigrated children of unknown fathers as ye spawn. For all that, Rikusen still felt the pride of knowing the Yi had protected these western reaches for centuries. Without Big Lin there, he did the next best thing and sat down beside Lakan. They met several times now, but the other man had made no effort to remember Rikusen. He did not try to remember anyone, in fact. He simply sat before his shogi board. If someone placed a few coins on the table, he would play. That was all he did. Sometimes he would compare a person to a shogi piece, judging them as weak or strong or by some other standard. "Mister, don't you remember faces?" someone asked. "I don't understand people's faces," Lakan said. He was a grown-up, but he did not always sound like one. "What's to understand? You see them a few times, you remember them, right? I only see ghost stones, or shogi pieces if I am lucky." This did not make sense to Rikusen, but he believed Lakan was telling the truth. Distinguishing faces was probably no easier for Lakan than telling livestock apart was for most people. Among the nomadic tribes, it was said some herdsmen could distinguish each and every one of their sheep, but Rikusen could never do that. Perhaps Lakan saw people's faces the same way Rikusen saw sheep. Well, what do you do when you really need to remember who someone is? Lakan was silent for a moment. He thought about Rikusen's question as he continued to play a relentless game of shogi. His opponent turned pale, admitted defeat, and placed some coins on the table. Perhaps Lakan was earning a living by betting on shogi games. Finally he said, "I remember them by the shape of their ears or their height. I look at the quality of their hair. I memorize the smell of their sweat. Or I listen for the pitch of their voice. Wouldn't it be easier to just remember their face? I don't understand faces. I can see people have eyes, a nose, and a mouth, but when I try to put them together they get all tangled up. All I can see is a ghost stone. But the size of a person's nostrils, the length of their eyelashes, those I can understand." So he didn't remember an entire face, just specific details about it. That sounded exhausting. No wonder he only did it for the most important people. "Did you come from the central region, mister?" Rikusen asked. "Yes, and one of these days I'll go back." "I've got to." Lakan casually smashed his next opponent as he spoke. "The central region," Rikusen murmured. His mother had told him to become the wind and blow on his way, but would she approve of him going as far as the royal capital? If wind he was to be, he wanted to travel as far as wind might. "Mister," he said, "if I become big and famous in the central region, will you give me a job? HRM. You move up from being a pawn, sure, all right, it's a deal." His sister had taught him that it was always a good thing to make connections. Rikusen didn't know if he would become a merchant or not, but it couldn't hurt to get to know everyone he could. In the evenings, the whole clan ate together. Rikusen was surrounded by women. The bloodline produced a lot of them to begin with, and since the only other boy had come of age last year, Rikusen was the only male child left. There were 3 little girls, though. They were sisters born in successive years. Rikusen had cousins. They looked much alike, perhaps sharing the same father. The cousins were 3, 4, and 5 years old. The oldest had proven quite smart, but the younger 2 could not really talk yet. Rikusen often found himself obliged to look after them. His older sister was already past the age of adulthood and accepted among the grown-ups. He listened to the adults talk as he fed his cousins. They spoke of food provisions, imported goods, and Lee's exports. Rikusen's mother was a central figure in the clan. Her younger sister, Rikusen's aunt, was the current ruler of the Yi. She had not borne any daughters. As things stood, Rikusen's older sister, well qualified by age and ability, was next in line to lead, so people went out of their way to include Rikusen's sister in their discussions. From what he overheard, Rikusen gathered that foreign trade was in a bad place right now. They had been in the red for years, to the point that the central region was giving them a hard time about it. Long ago they had produced copious quantities of high-quality paper, but these days there was only inferior stuff to be had. Paper, light and convenient to transport, had been a major product for them. Rikusen's mother and the others struggled to find a replacement for it. Worse, there had been an insect plague in Ise province. The increased farmlands, themselves a natural result of the western capital's burgeoning population, were to blame. All the royal capital could see were the harvest numbers. Since those remained high, they refused to send any support, but the extra people meant even less food to go around. We should bring out the black stone, his aunt said. His mother, his sister, his mother's older sister, and all the women of the clan could only nod their assent. Rikyusen did not know what the black stone was. He just continued feeding bread to his 3-year-old cousin. In the evenings, his sister and mother would teach him the history of Isei province. When the nation of Li was founded, they said, the 3 children from the belly of Wang Mu, the mother royal, became the leaders of the 3 provinces. At first the Yi clan, which ruled the west, struggled terribly.